I'm thinking back to this time last week. Well, I guess about, give or take a couple of hours. And I'm thinking about the time that I was leaving shul. And last week leaving shul, I felt particularly positive and particularly optimistic. To be with community, to spend time in prayer and Torah study, and of course to finish with bagels and conversation always lifts my spirit. And last week I felt this even more so than usual. But you remember this Jewish joke. What's the difference between a pessimist and an optimist? The pessimist says, things can't get any worse. And the optimist says, oh yes they can. Early last week, I had an experience that really shook me, and it shook me a bit out of proportion to what actually happened. I was leaving my house, about to walk a block down the street to yoga class, and honestly, it had been one of those days. I was running late, I was walking out the front door to our building, looking down at my phone as I frantically opened an app, trying to register for the class before it was too late. And suddenly, I was startled by a loud noise. A dog's bark right in front of me, right close to me. I looked up, and I'm sure there was fear on my face. What I saw was two men, and they were laughing. One of them had barked like a dog at me, presumably just to see what would happen. They had played a trick on me, and they were laughing at my fear and confusion, laughing at their success. Now, I've taught high school. I have seen many a young person under the influence of their peers and without the life experience to have full grown-up judgment do things like this to one another and even sometimes to their teachers. But something like this in the adult world, in the first moment after this happened, I could barely believe it. But as they passed me on the street laughing, as I continued my walk to yoga class, it hit me fully. And I thought, there's evil in the world. I'm honestly not sure what it was that made me take the leap all the way there, from a moment's incident on the street to a sweeping assertion about reality itself. Maybe it's because I've been beginning my high holiday preparation, speaking with our cantor and our shamas team about the details of these special services, thinking about the themes of wrongdoing and forgiveness. Maybe it's that our cycle of Haftarah readings is already working to prepare us for the high holiday season, still weeks away, reminding us that when we do wrong in the world, there are indeed consequences. I had this experience that reminded me that there is evil in the world, and as I continued to take it in, I couldn't help thinking about the ways in which it could have been worse. It occurred to me that in this situation, the men walking by probably didn't know that I was Jewish. It wasn't great that I was targeted in this way, but at least I wasn't a target because of who I am and who my people are. This week's Torah portion is the last portion in the book of Numbers, and in the Torah's narrative, we're approaching the end of Moses' life. At this point, Moses has been through a lot. He's led a generation out of slavery and seen that same generation die in the wilderness because of their wrongdoing. Moses has also been imperfect, and no doubt is continuing to struggle with the consequence of never being able to enter the Holy Land because he himself erred. At the same time, he's grieving the loss of his sister Miriam and seeing his brother Aaron get older, all the while trying to get his successor Joshua ready for the task before him. So in our portion, when the Reubenites and the Gadites, the tribes of Reuben and Gad, come to Moses with a special request, Moses is not in the most charitable of moods. The Reubenites and the Gadites explain that they understand that their tribes have been apportioned a special place in Israel and the Promised Land, but due to extenuating circumstances, they're requesting that they live somewhere else, on the other side of the Jordan River. It's just that they own a lot of livestock, and by their reckoning, the land on the other side of the Jordan would be a much better place for them to earn their living. Now Moses responds in a way that seems a bit out of proportion to their request. He responds first by saying, so you really think when it's time to go to war, all the other tribes will go fight while you stay here on the other side of the Jordan? Reading our Parsha this year, my first reaction here was, who said anything about refusing to go to war? Where is Moses getting this from? But Moses continues his objection to the request of the Reubenites and the Gadites, and he explains his worry. Why, Moses says, do you make this request when you know it will sway the minds of the other tribes, leading them to make their own special requests to dwell outside the promised land? Aren't you aware, Moses continues, that we've already been through this when the 10 evil spies argued against Caleb and Joshua and tried to convince everyone else that we shouldn't go into the promised land? As our Parsha unfolds, the Reubenites and the Gadites work things out with Moses, and they come up with a plan to accommodate everyone's needs and requests. In the end, everything is fine. But I'm still left wondering, why does Moses assume the worst? That this request of the tribes of Reuben and Gad is actually an assertion that they will refuse to go to war with their Israelite brothers. Moses has lived a long life. He's seen evil in the world. He knows it's there. He's seen evil in his siblings, and he's seen evil in himself when he failed to follow God's instruction to speak to the rock, instead striking the rock with his staff. He's had to live with the consequences of his failure. His life has taught him to be vigilant, to be on edge, to not assume that everything will work out fine, but instead be mindful of the worst possible consequences. In this situation, Moses is the first to strike at a potential wrongdoing, using a good offense as the best defense against evil in his midst. In our lives, should we act like Moses in this moment, using offense as our defense? After all, we know there's evil in the world. Shouldn't we act accordingly? As Jews, even when we look at the world through the lens of humor, we have good reason to say that things are bad and that at any point they could get worse. We consider our history. We consider all the forces that have risen up to destroy us throughout the ages, and we consider ourselves intimately each year during our high holiday season. We look to Moses, our greatest teacher, our greatest leader, the most humble person ever to exist, and we see that he is not perfect, that he too has had evil work through him, just a little bit, just for a moment. We look at the example of Moses and we see that each year we make mistakes. Even when we try to avoid being part of the evil in the world, we can get caught up. We're human, we make mistakes, that's what we do. We must try to be part of the solution, because we can't ever fully escape being part of the problem. So back to my story of walking down the street and being heckled for no particular reason in a random act of unkindness. As these strangers walked past me laughing, of course I felt a pulse of anger and even evil move through me as I began to react, both verbally and physically. Yet before I spoke, something in me softened, definitely not through any intentional act on my part. But as we walked away from each other in opposite directions, I spoke to them with a sound not of anger, but of disappointment. I could hear in my own voice that these strangers had let me down, that this moment of human interaction could have been a moment of goodness, and instead was a taste, thankfully a very small taste, of evil. I turned to them, and the words I spoke, they just came out, were, "Have a great night, guys." Of course, this didn't change anything about their behavior. But as I walked away, I remembered a saying I'd heard: to build self-esteem, do esteemable acts. I didn't allow their behavior to go unaddressed. I didn't hide how I felt. And most importantly, I didn't escalate the situation towards further danger. I wouldn't say I handled the situation perfectly. I'm not sure there is such a thing as handling that type of situation perfectly. But I have to admit that the way I reacted changed how I felt about myself. We read in Pirkei Avot, our Mishnaic compilation of important life lessons, "Uv'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel lihiyot ish." In other words, when no one is acting like a human being should, strive to be upright, strive to be mature, strive to be the one who's doing the right thing. We need this teaching because we know there is evil in the world. And we need this time in our Jewish year, our extended and gradual preparation for our high holiday season, because we know that the evil in the world can and does show up within ourselves. After all, if Moses can do wrong, so can we. Yet we also remember that our high holidays every year give us the opportunity to return to goodness, to return to the right path. As we go out into the world after this wonderful Shabbat together in community, may we be in balanced measure, both careful and hopeful. May we be aware that in this world we will encounter evil. We will encounter random acts of unkindness. We will encounter hate. And may we be aware that we can always strive to do the right thing. We can always return to the right path, that in this world where we will find evil, we will too find goodness. Shabbat Shalom.